we haven't really dealt with the idea of a staff, and Carl just mentioned how important a good staff was for any good program, and that's absolutely critical, and has been made possible by the largesse of the industry, the rootstock industry and the PD board. Really, I couldn't have done this without their financial help, and I couldn't maintain a lab. And how can you run a breeding program without permanent staff? It's impossible, because each person is developing independently and learning other things, and they need to mesh them all together. So I hope we go forwards in the idea that we need a decent program, not just an individual, but a program to really do a good job of table grape breeding. Okay, so I've had one of the best labs and best staffs for a very long time, and it's really been a pleasure to work with them all, and you're going to hear from them now. We're going to hear from Alan first on the list here, and then Sumara, and then Cecilia. And we also should have had Nina here, but Nina got away. She's in Palm Springs now, so she's not here to speak today. And Rong, I met this morning, so is Rong here still? Oh, she is here, good. You won't get to hear from Rong, but we can see Rong. We'll bring her up and make sure she's still active. Okay, so first up, Alan, come on up. So Alan one day walked into my office, and I'd met him a couple times. He was working with Franciscan and dealing with wine sales and commuting back and forth across the planet. And he said, I've had enough. I want to do something different. He said, can I take a sabbatical in your lab? And I said, well, sure. What do you want to do? He goes, well, I don't know. But we've sort of made it up as time went on. And it's been a good relationship, excellent relationship, got a lot done. And Alan's really pushed the program forward, I think, in so many ways.
Well, because of the infrastructure you built for
Yeah,
us.
I hope
that's
so.
for sure.
Take it away.
All right. Well, it is great to see so many of you from so many different aspects of my life. And the last 20 years of my professional career I spent with Andy and many of you, and it was a great experience. I got to start out making wine in 1977 in Santa Clara Valley, when there were still apricot trees in Silicon Valley, and then down into Morgan Hill and Gilroy, and got to watch the industry emerge, and then came back here for my graduate work in winemaking in 1984 through 86. Worked with Dr. Bolton, Dr. O, and right out of school, started a career with Schramsberg, where I was winemaker and then vice president of production. Then on to Franciscan and Quintessa, doing consulting work in South America. And as Andy said, sometimes you just want to take a step back and you want to put your hands onto the vines. You want to come to understand what they're trying to tell you. And I feel very fortunate that I was better lucky than smart, because I got to have a career where I got to understand wine and winemaking, and then I got to look inside the vine. One of the things that I felt most blessed by in the job that I had here breeding grapes with Andy was that you get to understand not only the phenotype, but you get to understand the genotype. You get to understand what your predecessors did, other breeders, and what nature did, what the accidents that are fortuitous, what they did. And so I felt very fortunate. When I first started with Andy, I came and wanted to work either on powdery mildew resistance or salt tolerance and drought tolerance. And so the first thing we did was we did a chloride study, which we presented at ASEV one year. And it's funny how in the wine industry things circle back. So maybe 15 years after we did that work, where we just tested the chloride uptake from a bunch of different vines at both Wolfskill, the repository, and here on campus, one of his graduate students postdocs, came to me and he said, did you do this work 15 years ago? And I said, yeah, Andy and I did that work. He said, wow, it's really pretty cool. Maybe we should start picking that up again. And here we are as an industry facing drought and water quality issues. And thank goodness that we started working on that a long time ago. And you've heard about nematode resistance, phylloxera resistance. And you know, in powdery mildew, we were very early on in discovering some of the early loci for powdery mildew resistance, and I think now the one from amurensis is Ren 13, maybe, something like that. So there's just been a huge exponential amount of learning, and it's because of people like Andy that create stable environments in which we can do our work. So anyway, we started our PD work, actually working with Dave Ramming at USDA. The wine grape industry thought, well, let's let the table grape industry do a proof of concept for us, and then once you know that works out, then you can go ahead and breed wine grapes. Well, we kind of put the cart before the horse, and the wine industry ended up wanting us to accelerate, and the table grape industry wanted us to slow down. So we ended up doing our work in wine grapes. And part of that was PD is one of the hardest diseases to work on. I think the saying goes, there's been more careers started and ended on Pierce's disease than on most any other disease, and that's because it can be very challenging to work on. But anyway, onward and upward. Andy loves grapes. You saw a picture earlier where there was a big circle. I think it was Claire's, and it was Vitis arizonica. Well, Andy has quite a few of them. I don't think there's any grape that Andy has met that he doesn't like, except maybe Shuttleworthy eye. Possibly. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to show you some of the collection that he has. So in addition to all of those, 172 other accessions in 25 other species. So this is a hugely valuable collection. It would be a terrible travesty to let it slip from our hands. So we need to protect that diversity because, as Andy said, so often to us, they'd come back from a collecting trip where they had been just 10 years earlier, and the grapes were gone. And part of it is the grape is a dynamic crop, but not if you put ranchettes on top of what used to be wildland. And so we need to keep that in mind, that some of this material is irreplaceable. All right, so I learned a bunch of different things from Andy, but one of the most important things, I think, is that you can't breed grapes without an intimate knowledge of the parental vines and the diversity of the available germplasm. Don't expect success if you never leave the lab. And that's one of the things that Andy hammered into our heads time and time again, is know the crop intimately, know your material. And I think that was some of the things that helped us move forward as quickly as we did. Historically, PD breeding took maybe 7 to 10 years for a generation. 7 to 10 years means that a breeder in a 30-year career gets 3 generations. Because of the work we did with molecular markers and because of the work we did with good staff and reliable vineyard help, we were able to change that cycle to a 2-year cycle. And with our rapid greenhouse screen, we could do many generations. So we went from wild crop to a finished product in 10 years. It took another 5 years worth of wine trials and field trials to get that to all work out. But still, that's so amazing, and that's because of the stable environment that Andy was able to develop for us thanks to industry funding, because I was here for 20 years on soft money every year. Another thing was start with the varieties you know. So we started with Cab and Chard and Pinot and Zin. We got to find out that with the exception of Chard up there, all of them carry a black and a white allele if they're black, and they carry a hermaphrodite and a female allele, which to me means that there was definitely some intention with breeding over the years, and that's one of the fun things that I got to be involved with, is getting to look inside the grape. But also Andy wanted us to be sure to embrace the less familiar, so we worked with a bunch of different varieties. And I think he had me use Pedro Jimenez up there just because he liked to say it. All right. I won't go on too much about the grape breeding, but grape breeders, those of you that are not grape breeders, they're a very unusual group. They, I won't bring up John Grinstead, unless you want to. I mean, no. This guy used to breed grapes in the nude. Don't ask me why. But anyway, we got to travel to all kinds of different places: New York, Florida, Georgia, Missouri, Minnesota, and Arkansas. And the reason I put Arkansas up there was there's two reasons. One is that their group was very interested in a product. Their focus at the end or the current iteration is that they wanted to develop a product, and so they were one of the people. The cotton candy grape, the flavor for that comes out of the Arkansas program, so that was their product. But the other thing, and more importantly, was I had attended a lot of these meetings with Andy, but at these meetings you give station reports, okay? So you say what your program is doing. And Andy must, you only have 15 minutes or so to give the presentation, but Andy spoke for 15 minutes and he must have covered 10 topics, and in such depth that I just could not believe that any one person can know so much about such a diverse breeding program and have all the facts at the tip of his tongue. So I was very impressed by that, and it left me with a very great deal of respect for what you know. All right. So Andy, I don't know if you can see this, but I want you to see it. This is courtesy of Seth, my son. Andy used to, and I, before he would go on these trips to promote the grape varieties or to get funding, he would talk about having to put on his white belt and his white shoes and his salesman outfit. And so many of you have probably seen this car salesman meme, but yep, there you go. All right, so we were successful. We have varieties that made it. We're very proud of them. They make pretty good wine. They have good disease resistance, at least from the PD side. Pretty good horticultural traits. There's more in the pipeline if anybody ever wants to dig them out. We've sent them to FPS. Some of them have powdery mildew resistance as well. Black and white. And you've seen this picture before, but I wanted to show it so that you know just how diverse the people are in the lab, the different backgrounds, both domestic and international, all kinds of different backgrounds, and yet a cohesive, stable group thanks to Andy's leadership. And so thank you, Andy, for making the sacrifices to keep the grant money coming in so the rest of us could do our parts. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure all you did.
It wasn't as though it wasn't fun. It was good fun. It was a wonderful opportunities.